Hear from your group that are germane to our topic. Nothing.
We're struck by how.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah, just one thing that I just underlined this in my notes, and I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but you know, this thing of all nations, all peoples, really kind of stands out to me. Everybody, okay? Because now you relate to the Jewish people and the Gentiles. To here, it's Gentiles, it's everybody. But by the time Jerusalem was restored, all of a sudden it became just Jewish, no Gentile. So they were kind of in opposition to what Isaiah is saying right here.
I applaud that. Yeah. Again, I don't think we can overestimate how significant this text is, and then how it got associated with Isaiah, the historical Isaiah, because there isn't much like it in the rest of the Old Testament. There are very few times when we read in the Old Testament a world vision. But it's interesting. It came after exile. Think about that, yeah. So they were put into another culture, and some parts of it they didn't like, but some parts I suspect they did, and so they began to be nudged along the path of there's only one God, huh? I am the Lord, there is no other. What is God, Yahweh's plan for these people? Just as when European explorers stumbled upon the New World and found it populated, you know. Up until that point, Christians had believed everybody had heard the gospel. Everybody in the world was either a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian. They all had a chance. They all had been given a chance. And now suddenly, my gosh, there are people who have lived here. They didn't know how long, but we know now for thousands of years. So what was God's plan for them? Did God just write them out of his plan? In the Catholic Church, the stumbling on the New World and the peoples of the New World caused a lot of rethinking about baptism. Augustine had kind of ruled the day, Augustine's thinking, and so with his idea about original sin, he came out pretty clearly that said, without baptism, you're toast. You have no chance. Because again, Augustine was under the assumption everybody's had a chance. Everybody now has had a chance. And so, and the Catholic Church had kind of followed Augustine because he was such a brainiac in so many ways. But the stumbling upon the New World really caused the church to say, well, that can't be. It can't be that simple. Because why would God create a people just to condemn them? So sometimes it's that kind of experience that gets you to think more broadly. And I meet it mostly with people who haven't read the Old Testament much, but the parts that they've heard make God seem like he's very parochial. He's very, very, very judgmental. And no, the Bible is a library. You've got to read all of it. And there's tensions between this and things you've already read before and things we're going to read in Ezra and Nehemiah.
So when we talked about salvation, universal salvation, that's a huge issue. Like a good person, I went through Catechism 9 months and baptized. And so I am officially Catholic.
Officially you are.
I am.
You're working on it though.
But,
So are we.
So the Karl Rahner talks about
Anonymous Christians.
Anonymous Christians, okay. And Catholics don't even give the communion to Lutherans. How you figure that out?
Well,
so
communion is not the same as baptism, and so there are Catholics who shouldn't receive communion. So that's not a good. You're right, but it's kind of a throwaway line because communion is not a right. Communion is it's a privilege. And the church has never seen it as a right. You don't have a right to communion. Even Catholics don't have a right. So get to where you. So I'm just saying, be careful when you go there. But what do you want to say?
So is Catholic ever gonna change?
Yeah. Well, it's your job to change it, starting with yourself, and then us, and then it'll reach out.
Just question.
It will take. I see the church on the Catholic Church is not a finished product, huh? Like Bible wasn't a finished product. It's moving. And that's why we have a magisterium. We have tradition. We're on the road, huh? We're still learning. Just like when the explorers discovered the New World, it engendered new thoughts. So we're still working on it. Okay. Yes.
Third Isaiah, we're assuming is not necessarily written by Isaiah, correct?
Third Isaiah is surely not written by the original historical Isaiah. There is discussion, is it, or are parts of it, from the so-called second Isaiah.
Okay, so who determines that it came after the second?
Nobody determines it. Scholars debate it.
Oh.
There's no, there are, a few would argue that third Isaiah is just second Isaiah with more time.
Okay.
But some would say it's a different prophet. I don't see there's enough data. I don't see how, I mean, some people are really good and quick to make judgments like that. I'm saying, I don't think there's enough evidence. But it's certainly a different kind of thing.
But it is, and is it important? I mean, like.
You will not get to heaven if you don't have the right answer. No, in the big picture, it's not important.
What his name was, or.
No. But it's important. I think it's important to recognize that, because again, I think the average Christian reader of the Old Testament blends it all together. When it's not a single voice, it's more like a chorus. And there are different voices, and sometimes there are dissonances, sometimes there's complex chords, the timbre of the different. So I want you to recognize the difference in the outlook and theology. It could be the same person, yeah. And your point's well taken. In the big picture, ultimately, it doesn't matter. It only matters here. Your exam next month. Yes. See?
I have to remember.
Thanks for bringing that up. All right. Any other comment or question? Okay, let's move on. After the lofty rhetoric of Isaiah, Ezra and Nehemiah, and frankly, the works for next month may seem anticlimactic. Yet the period of Ezra and Nehemiah is formative in Judaism. Language and motifs have led some readers to draw together that Ezra, Nehemiah, the books of Chronicles are all sharing the fingerprints of one school of thought. And so you might see in books, particularly, books older than, probably in the original version of Boat, he would have talked about the chronicler's history. I'm not sure if the revised, that was part of your reading, the revised edition of the Old Testament might not. That theory has lost some of its popularity, just as there is the Deuteronomistic historian, the author of Judges, Samuel, Kings, that's obviously one kind of approach, one vocabulary, one way of looking at things. So Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles are another. That's not quite so clear, and I'm not surely going to go to the wall on that. But I still will use the formula, the phrase, for that's why Ezra, Nehemiah, and the Chronicles next time are all in a row, because there's a tradition of seeing them written by the same school of thought. And I'll refer to the chronicler's history, but recognize that it's not by any means a sure thing, and more contemporary or more recent scholars have kind of thought it best to keep them separate. The chronicler's work is not so much a wholly new work as it is an interpretation of the other history that's in the Bible. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. So it is helpful, I think, to understand this as a different way of looking at Jewish history. It's even, scholars even go so far as to suggest that there are documents hidden in this book. Some of the documents are easy, a letter from so-and-so to so-and-so. That's a document. The author didn't presumably write it up, make it up, but he's got some access, and so he incorporates the letter. We would put it in, a footnote, or we put it in quotation marks. They don't do that, but we have things like that, and scholars wonder if there isn't behind it a couple of works written in the first person by Ezra and Nehemiah. It was kind of like their memoir. So what I put on the board are the proposals made by scholars, that because at some point the language moves from third person narrative to first person. Now again, is that the author just pretending to make it more engaging to the reader? Or is it that he's got some sources, some words that came from Nehemiah and Ezra? Again, it's only a proposal. Again, like Joanne's point about the authors of Isaiah, you shouldn't expect to be asked by St. Peter what you think about it, but it's just something in the background. Well, I can say this. The editors, both of Ezra and Nehemiah and the book of Chronicles, whoever they were, whether it was just one person or a bunch of people, were dominated by a central conviction that Israel was called to be, above all, a worshiping community. A people whose life was centered on the temple, and its worship, and on priests and Levites in its daily life. So we're going to see an emphasis on the temple that we haven't seen since the book of Leviticus. You're going to see, you saw it in Ezra and Nehemiah. You're going to also see it in Chronicles. Whether they were written by one in one fell swoop or not, they share that concern. So Israel returns home not just a nation, but a kind of a religious community centered on the temple. The great problem or challenge of Ezra and Nehemiah is the origin of these works and the sequence of events. You can go way into the weeds on this. I just want to explain to you some of the detail or some of the problems. The main question is, who came first? Nehemiah or Ezra? Or actually, they're presented as being around the same time. Is that real? In the Septuagint, the Greek translation, they are not. The big event where they both appear is in Nehemiah 8, the scene where the Torah is read out to the people at the Watergate. You might see in the translation, you might have brackets around Nehemiah's name. Because in the Septuagint, the Greek translation, he doesn't appear. So it seems historically Ezra came first and Nehemiah comes second. And they're separated by like 30 years or 25 years. At least, again, it's hard to understand the dating because unfortunately the Persians like the name Xerxes. So there are several kings who had long reigns who are Xerxes or Artaxerxes, the same name. So the references to so many years of the king Xerxes or Artaxerxes, that doesn't really help us as much as it might. So scholars are a bit unsure. Here's what we're going to kind of go on. That Ezra's career predates Nehemiah by 13 years. Okay? And so it's in the middle of the 5th century. Okay? 475 to 425. That's the period of this book. Again, one proposal is that Ezra's mission was much later, around the year 400, okay, in the next century. That's not the recommendation I make, but just saying, if you read around, you'll find a great deal of debate about that. Okay? So what are the theological themes of the work? Well, first, I said there are four. First, continuity with pre-exilic Israel. The author will like to have opportunities to say that what we're doing now is what our ancestors did. You'll see it that the temple is built on the same site as the old temple. The vessels that had been used in the Old Testament that were carried off by the Babylonians were returned by the Persians to the exiles to take back. So a sense of continuity between pre-exilic and now returnees. Two, and a focus on the purity, ritual purity of the people. Attempt to give the community, and that's a theme that we saw when Moses sent them across the River Jordan. Don't marry those people. Keep yourselves separate. Destroy their cities and their culture. Well, you're going to see a similarity that the authors see the returning exiles kind of like the original Israelites and the warnings they were given about mixing with the locals. You remember that thing, huh? It's really important. The idea of holy war and keep your separation, don't marry them, that goes back to the Torah. And of course, it resurfaces here. Three, a defense for the delay of building the temple and the walls. That is, it was not due to the people's laziness, as Haggai kind of proposed, but because they faced external opposition. You see, it's not their fault, it's because the other peoples around them hassled them. It gives them an explanation for why they were so slow to build the temple. And fourth, subtly, the works speak about how Judah has a collaborative connection with the Persians. Persians come off pretty good, generally speaking, in Ezra and Nehemiah. And so I'm not saying it's propaganda, but just that fact, which is surely going to lead to a positive connection. Because again, the people are subject to the Persians. They remain subject to the Persians for 2 centuries until Alexander the Great. Okay, and then they become subject to the Greeks. So there's no political independence, but there's a kind of a collaborative relationship with the Persians. Those are 4 themes to draw from this. Okay. We will study these works. By the way, in Judaism, in the Hebrew Bible, they are one work. It's Ezra-Nehemiah. In our Christian Bibles, they're 2 separate works. Okay? So we're going to treat them as, and again, there's so much overlap, we're going to treat them in 5 sections. Okay? Section 1 is the return from exile and the rebuilding of the temple. And that's in Ezra 1 through 6. Let's just start reading. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the capital, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came with certain men out of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that survived, who had escaped exile, and concerning Jerusalem. They said to me, the survivors there in the province who escaped exile are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So notice the text begins in the first person. Okay? So it's not a story about Nehemiah. It's written by Nehemiah. You're looking at me with a puzzle on your face.
You said Ezra. Yeah,
I thought we
started with Nehemiah and then about Ezra.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong book. That explains your puzzle. How long would you have let me go before you raised a hand? See, old Grandpa's getting over and you're just going to nod. Just nod and smile. It's okay. All right, Ezra. Oh, I have many. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. Now, that's a reference to Jeremiah's prediction that 70 years and then people will come back. Huh? The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven. Now, notice, it starts out Yahweh. Huh? Okay, now, did he really start out with Yahweh? He might have. The Jewish people at the time of the exile stopped using God's personal name. But here is Cyrus using it. Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people may go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. That's the Persian view of things. Huh? Remember, for the Jews, he's the only God. And let each survivor, in whatever place he sojourns, be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides freewill offerings for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. Okay, so here we are introduced first with the historical setting under Cyrus the Persian. This is the same Cyrus as we saw referenced in II Isaiah. But we get supposedly Cyrus's decree releasing the people to go home. And the author has shaped it. I'm not convinced that's exactly from the archives of the Persian state, because it's shaped to read like the escape from Egypt, insofar as when they left Egypt, Moses told the people to ask their neighbors to take gold and silver and in response to their centuries of slavery. Okay? And so similarly here, but now the money that's collected here is from fellow Jews. But the point being then that the returned exiles are in this degree like the escaping Hebrews out of Egypt. They're outfitted with wealth so that will help them. And then go a little further with me here. Then rose up the heads of the fathers, houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up to rebuild the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. And all who were about them aided them with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, with beasts, with costly wares, besides all that was freely offered. Cyrus the king also brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar, remember he's a Babylonian, that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. Cyrus, king of Persia, brought these out in charge of Mithridath, the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. So he's a member of the David's line. Is he the same character as Zerubbabel that we saw in Zechariah? Or we'll see later? Not clear. But he is a member of the royal line of David. So you might see a political, oh my gosh, we're going to have a king again. Now, Sheshbazzar, though, disappears from the story. So did he kind of just die a natural death? Did he just live a quiet life? Did the Persians kind of rub him out? I mean, those are all, did the Persians do something so that there wouldn't be a hope for a national revival of a king in Israel is a possibility. Notice again that the reference to the vessels. That's that link of that what the Jews came back to rebuild in Jerusalem is a temple to replace the old one, but the vessels are the same vessels, so that it speaks to that continuity. Chapter 2 is a list of those who returned, and I'm going to have you read it.
No.
It's kind of like the genealogy of Jesus. Okay? It goes on. Was it part of your homework to read it?
No.
Oh, you poor guys. Let's just read the first verse. Now these were the people of the province who came up out of the captivity of those exiles, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried captive to Babylon. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town. They came with Zerubbabel, Yeshua, Nehemiah, and so on. Zerubbabel, is that the same? That's the Zerubbabel that was in Haggai. Okay? There was Zerubbabel and there was Josiah. So is the Jeshua, is that Josiah, the priest? Not quite clear. But but probably, let's say it is. Zerubbabel is a member of David's line. Maybe he's the same as Sheshbazzar. Sheshbazzar being a Persian name for him. Zerubbabel is his Jewish name, maybe, or two separate people, and Joshua. And then follows the long list of people by tribe. So it's after the exile. There are Judites, there are members of the tribe of what's with the B, Mark? Benjamin, and then there are Levites, who don't count as a tribe at all anymore. It's those offspring. Look at verse 64. The whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their men servants and maid servants, of whom there were 7,337, and they had 200 male and female singers. So put that all together, it's 49,897. What do you learn about the class of the people who are leaving? Are they poor, destitute? How do you know that? They have slaves, they're servants, and they have a singing group. Okay? So, again, they did well. That's why not everybody wanted to leave Babylon.
Yeah.
The Jews did well. Huh? And so, is this number a reliable number? Hard to say, hard to know. But the tribal names are really important because all Jews will point and link their ancestry to these people. Okay? Chapter 3. When the 7th month came, and the sons of Israel were in the towns, the people gathered as one man to Jerusalem. Then arose Yeshua, son of Jozadak, with his fellow priests. So this is, now we're suggested that Yeshua is Joshua, who we saw in Zechariah. And Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, with his kinsmen, and they built the altar of the God of Israel. So as soon as they get back, they build an altar, right, to offer burnt offerings upon it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. They set the altar in its place, for fear was upon them because of the peoples of the lands. Now, earlier in the Deuteronomistic history, peoples of the land is just a word for the Jewish people in general, or the people who live on the people who farm. But here you get the sense that the people of the land are the descendants of those who did not go into exile. Okay? So there's a distinction drawn between the returning exiles and the people of the land. They're not on the same page. Okay? They offered burnt offerings upon it to the Lord, burnt offerings morning and evening, and they kept the feast of booths, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number. So what we're seeing here is the restoration of the altar worship, the sacrifices, that were made. Okay? And booths. When is booths? In the fall. What's its other name? Tabernacles. What does it commemorate? Well, it takes the place during the vintage harvest, but historically it commemorates the time in the wilderness, the 40 years in the wilderness. Just checking, make sure that you haven't forgotten everything. Okay, so they're coming back, and they begin immediately. All right. Then look at verse 10. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, and the Levites, sons of Asaph, with cymbals to praise the Lord, according to the directions of David, king of Israel. That's Psalms. Huh? And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. That's a refrain in both Psalm 106 and in 136. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy. When we read Zechariah, I think it was Zechariah, or was it Haggai? There was reference to the sadness at this little thing, or this, that those who saw it wept because it didn't compare to the Temple of Solomon. So that's referencing the same thing. Those who were old enough, who had been old enough to have a memory before they were exiled, have come back, and they see how small is the territory. They laid a foundation stone, so they have the outline of the temple and how it's a garage compared to the Taj Mahal that Solomon had built. Okay? Chapter 4. Now, when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, they're introduced as adversaries, so we know what side they're on, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of fathers' houses and said, "Let us build with you, for we will worship your God as you do." Now again, these are the descendants of those who were left behind. And so you think, well, gosh, they're the same people. Okay, but it's been 50 years. And remember, Jeremiah wrote that letter, said, the future of our people is with you. And they drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, they preserved the letter of Jeremiah, and they see themselves as a special people, and they, from the very beginning, don't get off on the right foot with those who were left behind. And here we see, again, we're introduced to them as adversaries, but they didn't start as adversaries. I don't think, but something confirmed that in the minds of the returning exiles. Back to verse 2, in the middle. So they say, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God, as you do." Notice they don't call him Yahweh. Notice that the text does not allow them to use the word Yahweh, which would, were they so stupid? I don't know. "Ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." Now, we're talking about not people in the south, but people in the north. Because Assyria, remember, A is before B. The Assyrians broke up the northern 10 tribes and scattered them a century and a bit, before the Babylonians did the same to the south. So the peoples here are the peoples in the land of the northern tribes. Okay, so catch that. Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said, "You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God. For we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, king of Persia, has commanded us." Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build. This is the origin of the Samaritans. Okay? Samaria is a city in the north, and it was for a while the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. So the people who are called Samaritans are the remnant. They're related to the Jews, and they were ethnically the same at one point, but they were divided by the two kingdoms. And then when the Assyrians captured and destroyed the north, they were scattered, and the Assyrians brought other peoples in. At least that's the talk. Remember, who preserved the Bible, the Old Testament, for us? It's a southern production. It's the exiles. We have the exiles to thank for this book. So maybe, is there a little bit of southern kingdom propaganda? You got to be open to that possibility. That, again, you might say, well, it's the Bible. It hadn't happened that way. Well, maybe what we were given is the result of an argument that grew up. Was it God's will that it not happen? There are Samaritans today. They're a very small number, like 1,000, less than 1,000. They live in the West Bank, and they have a Torah. That is, they read the first 5 books of the Bible. That's all they read. They don't read anything else in Scripture. They still do sacrifices. They offer sacrifices, and sometimes if you know somebody, you can get to see them. They live in a kind of a closing community. They're going to go out of existence soon because there's now mixed marriage between the Samaritans and the Jews, and in the next century or so, they're going to be absorbed into the greater Jewish population. So I mean, they were once dominant cultural presence, but now they're kind of inbred and a lot of illness. They're kind of, their genetic line is very weak, but they're still a thing. And you Google them, or if you check your YouTube cartoons, you'll find there'll be clips of them in action, because they love to show off their sacrifices, and their Torah and all that. So yes.
Is it assumed then that the 10 tribes became Samaritans?
No, it's just that most of the 10 tribes are just scattered. The Samaritans are a remnant of them who preserved their identity in Palestine. They are connected. They are related to the Jews.
Through probably the 10 northern tribes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
But there were also people brought in from other places.
Yes. So they're mixed. They're not pure. They're not a pure. They're not. If you did a 23andMe, they're not going to be the exact same thing. Huh? Yes.
So there's no Samaritans in the diaspora anymore?
I don't know that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that. That's a good question. And the accent
This
is
day of travel.
the accent is diaspora. Diaspora. Just the accent.
How about those who wasn't forced to deport? The people, did they have a right? Did they have a choice? They could go along or stay?
I don't know that. We're just told the Babylonians selected the best people. We don't know that other people's come along. I don't know. I can't imagine them going along just for fun, but maybe they did. Don't know. Yes?
Because of the mixed marriages of the Samaritans, is that why they were considered outcasts?
That's one of the reasons. But again, is that a real reason? Or is that just an excuse of a reason? In a sense that, but again, culturally, things have changed. The exile community has been forged, and they've got an identity, and they see themselves as commissioned by God now. Huh? Isaiah, 2 Isaiah said, go back. You are the new Israel. Well, these people have blood claims. They were always there. So you have to, how do those two fit together? Could they have fit together another way? Perhaps they didn't. And so what we have is the story told by the returning exiles about what they found. And then, as it said here, the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah. So people of Judah are the returned exiles. People of the land are the Jews who remained behind, blended with other tribes, including the Samaritans. And that's how they become the Samaritans. They didn't probably use the title Samaritans. It's the title that the Jews gave them. Okay?
They still considered themselves
They still consider themselves Jews.
And they just felt like they were being.
They consider themselves actually the true Jews. That the exile, you can argue it two ways. The people behind got blended with, other tribes and they lost their purity. Or you can say, well, the exiles at Babylon, we don't know what they did over there. They come back high and mighty with the king's letters, but, we don't know. We were here offering animals all along. What were they doing? So both sides could have a different story. Okay? Interesting and curious. Okay, but the point here is the author is clearly saying the delay of the temple is not the fault of the exiles. Where Haggai says, au contraire. Remember? You've built for yourselves this and you've done this. Why haven't you built God's house? So again, we have a different explanation for the delay. I'm not the arbiter to tell you which is true. I'm just saying Haggai has got a different story than Ezra has about why it happened. Because again, the dedication happens as soon as they get there. And then it never takes off. It grinds to a halt. How to explain that? Well, Ezra has an answer for it. Look at verse 24 of chapter 4. Then the work of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, stopped, and it ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So, chapter 5. Now, the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, son of Jehozadak, arose and began to rebuild the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, and with them were the prophets of God helping them. Okay? At the same time, Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates came to them and spoke to them thus: Who gave you a decree to build this house and to finish this structure? They also asked them this: What are the names of the men who are building this building? But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, and they did not stop them till a report should reach Darius, and then answer be returned by letter concerning it. So, Tattenai is a Persian, presumably, and he is governor of the province, and it's called Beyond the River. Now, that title comes to it from Palestine is beyond the river. What river? The river Tigris and Euphrates, from the direction of Persia. Okay? So he's talking about what we call Palestine, but to a Persian, it's the territory beyond the river. So that's the Persian name for that territory. So again, 20 years. So there was no building other than the altar and the foundation. And now they're building again, and that gets the attention, radar, of the satrap, the governor of the Persians. Because any kind of structure, I mean, not just because you have to have a building permit. If it's got to do with religion or government, it could be a threat. So he's like saying, so why are you doing this? Now, granted, there was a 20-year hiatus, but they say, well, Cyrus told us to do this. Well, Cyrus is dead. So they said, well, let's go check. You have to go check. So they send somebody, again, 100 days travel, unless you took the Pony Express, 100 days travel back, and maybe more, to Persia, and then to check the register of deeds to get the document and bring it back. Okay. Meanwhile, the building continues. Okay, doesn't stop. Okay. So then, what follows is it says in verse 6, the copy of the letter which Tattenai, the governor. So we get the letter that was sent by Tattenai, and then we get a letter back from the Persian bureaucracy. Thing to note is these letters are not in Hebrew. They are in Aramaic. Aramaic. And so it's really not proper to say that the Old Testament is all in Hebrew. It's not all in Hebrew. Parts of Ezra are in Aramaic. Parts of the book of Daniel are in Aramaic. Aramaic was the, I don't know, it was like the cultural, bureaucratic language of the Persian Empire. It's not Persian. Persian is, I mean, that's another language. But as far as holding their empire together, the Persians did their writing in Aramaic. Much like in 19th century Russia, French was used. To communicate with Europe during the Napoleonic, French had become kind of the dominant language of diplomacy, as English is now. So there are parts of the Old Testament that are Aramaic. Aramaic is related to Hebrew, and this is the language that Jesus spoke. By the time of Jesus, Hebrew was a written language, not a spoken one. Aramaic was the language of the common people in New Testament Palestine. Okay? So they're not radically different. It's like Italian, and if you know Italian, you can kind of make out Spanish. I mean, or better, Spanish and Portuguese. They're closer related, but they're distinct alphabets and all that. Okay, so let's read a little bit, not of Tatanai's letter. Let's read a little bit of the response. Chapter 6. Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in Babylonia, in the house of the archives, where the documents were stored. And in Ecbatana, the Persians had 4 capital cities, and Ecbatana is one of them. Ecbatana, the capital which is in the province of Media, a scroll was found on which this was written, a record. In the first year of Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem, let the house be rebuilt. And so on. Look at verse 4, the last line. Let the cost be paid from the royal treasury. And so on. Okay, we need to read it. So they find a copy of a letter, of a document, and it happens to correspond to what Cyrus said in chapter 1, remember? When he said you can go home, build the temple. Well, then here's another document that kind of backs that up. Verse 6. Now therefore, Tatanai, governor of the province beyond the Jordan, keep away. So again, the letter continues. So Tatanai, keep your nose out of it. This is the Persian king, Darius, telling him, keep your nose out of it. Let the work on this house of God alone. Again, in verse 8, the last sentence, the cost is to be paid to these men in full and without delay from the royal revenue, the tribute of the province from beyond the river. Verse 10, that they may offer pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. So that's the letter. It includes a copy of the original document from Cyrus, but the diplomatic letter comes from Darius. Okay. Verse 14, and for me it's 14. What are you looking at? Oh, second. Okay. And the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. They finished their building by command of the king of Israel and by decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So it is Darius who answers the letter about the year 520 or 521. By the time the temple is finished in 515, Artaxerxes, or we know him just as Xerxes. This is the Xerxes that tried to invade Greece. In your upbringing, in your history of Western civilization, he was the enemy. He was the bad guy. Okay, he was the guy who lost his fleet. The battle of whatever it was. Can't think of it. Anyway, he's known as Xerxes in the West. It's Artaxerxes in the Bible. This house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. That's March 515. 515. Okay, and at the end of the chapter, down at verse 18, they set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their courses for the service of God in Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. And that is the end of the Aramaic chapter. Okay, so all of that chapter was in Aramaic, a little bit of the previous chapter as well. Okay. Questions? Yes, Mr. Engineer.
But Cyrus issued a decree, did he not also have to stop the construction? So.
No, Cyrus did not. Okay, so let's get this right. Cyrus is the one who lets them go home and tells them to build to their God and worship. And they come back and they start, and then it stops. The threat comes from the local people of the land. Okay, so that's not a governmental thing. It's a local tribal thing of some sort. Okay, again, Haggai in his preaching doesn't mention that. He doesn't say, oh, you were hassled by the locals. No, he just says you've been worrying about yourself, not about the house of God, when he tries to restart things. Then Tattenai, who is the governor of the then Persian king, who is not Cyrus but Darius. Again, he hadn't communicated to Darius. He just came in and said, stop, in the name of love. And then they send a letter. But they don't stop. They keep building until, which is kind of a sign that, there's a sense of, well, you can't stop us until you've got a real letter. In the meantime, you can keep going. Again, it shows the Persians are not unreasonable people. They're doing their due diligence, but they're not unreasonable. And so the building continues. And now we've just read the letter that comes from Darius that includes the excerpt from the decree of Cyrus. Okay, does that help keep things in order? Yes.
And they're building on the same spot of Solomon's temple.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but just not as big.
But not as big. So not the same outline, but on the same spot. Okay? Verse 19. On the 14th day of the first month, the returned exiles kept the Passover. Notice, they've been home how long? 20 years. But they're still called the returned exiles. Okay, again, to distinguish them from the natives, so-called natives. And now, Ezra makes it appear that they had not been celebrating Passover. Okay? So they killed the Passover lamb for all the returned exiles, for their fellow priests, and for themselves. It was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and also by everyone who had joined them and separated himself from pollutions of the peoples of the land, to worship the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel. And they kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, as they were supposed to. Okay? Now, it seems 57 years pass. This is where because Artaxerxes is much later. After this, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, verse 6. This Ezra went up from Babylonia. He was a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given, and the king granted him all that he asked. So it's many years later. Again, it's depending on how you understand who Xerxes is. Is this Artaxerxes the first or Artaxerxes the second? In any case, Ezra gets permission to return, and he's a scribe. Scribes are, what do scribes focus? I mean, anybody who can write is a scribe, I guess. But what's the main thing Jewish scribes worry about is the written law. And so he goes up. So far they've been moving along with priests and with Sheshbazzar, he's gone already. But now we have what we would call a legal expert. A Jewish religious legal expert comes. Verse 7. They went up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, the king. Verse 9. He came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For on the 1st day of the 1st month, he began to go up from Babylonia, and on the 1st day of the 5th month, he came to Jerusalem. Remember, the Jewish calendar, the 1st month at this point is April. So he travels from April, May, June, July. It's 100 days. 100 days it takes him to get from Babylon to Jerusalem. Okay? Verse 10. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach his statutes and ordinances in Israel. Verse 12. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra, this is a copy of the letter which King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra. So now, not only do they have a letter from Darius and a letter from Cyrus, but now they've got a letter from Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes, the king of kings, to Ezra the priest, scribe of the law of the God of heaven. Now I make a decree that any one of the people of Israel, or the priests or Levites in my kingdom, who freely offers to go to Jerusalem may go with you. For you are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to make inquiries about Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your hand. So Ezra becomes the part of a new return. Verse 25. You, Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God, which is in your hand, appoint magistrates and judges who may judge all the people in the province beyond the river, all such as know the laws of your God, and those who do not know them you shall teach. So the book gives us the impression that it is the Persian king Xerxes who gives the scribe Ezra the commission to take his legal code and go back to Palestine and teach people to keep it. Verse 27. Notice the change to first person. Blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers, who put such a thing as this into the heart of the king, to beautify the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, and who extended to me his steadfast love before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty officers. I took courage, for the hand of the Lord my God was upon me, and I gathered leading men from Israel to go with me. So Ezra sees himself as called not only by the king but by God to bring the law back to the people who have returned to Palestine. And he recruits others, priests and others, and the rest of the chapter gives us a long list of them. And there are 1,511 in case you didn't count it on your own. Chapter 8, verse 32. We came to Jerusalem, and there we remained 3 days. On the 4th day, within the house of our God, the silver and the gold and the vessels were weighed into. They were also given money, and the group of exiles has that money. And when they arrive, they have to show that they brought everything, and they got to show the decree that says it weighed so much there and it weighs so much now. Okay. The whole was counted and weighed, and the weight of everything was recorded. That's verse 34. 36. They also delivered the king's commissions to the king's satraps and to the governors of the province beyond the river, and they aided the people and the house of God.